Yeah, John here.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. We're just letting everyone come in from the lobby for this next webinar, just around the new playing guidelines. Natalie will mute everyone. And again, just to remind you, we do have the chat box. If you want to put any questions in there and Phil Nappet will be overseeing the chat box for us today.
Hi, everyone.
You feel softer having got wet outside.
Background picture.
Okay, good afternoon again. Just those who have just entered, if you can just mute yourself, that would be really helpful. Just saves with background noise with so many people on the call. And we'll get started. Just a reminder, there is a chat box. We will try and answer as many of the questions as we can. If not, we will come back to you individually. So just to help us today, if you can mention which club you're from, it just helps us in terms of coming back to your individual requirement maybe for your club.
Hi there.
Hi there. I'm from Aztec Cricket Club.
Hello, everyone. This is Samir representing GLCL League.
Hi, everyone. This is Gurmail representing BCL.
Hi, everyone. This is Adnan representing Leighton Avengers.
Hi, this is Kalyan representing Aztec Cricket Club.
Hi, this is Simon from Kenton.
Yeah, good afternoon. If we can not just mute ourselves, guys, because otherwise it's going to take a long time to go through an individual welcome with everyone. We're just waiting for the last few to come through from the lobby, and then we'll get started in a sec. Thank you very much.
Thank you to everybody who's already started putting things in the chat box. For those who haven't used this before, it's just in the middle of the screen, right at the bottom. Just type in any message there. As people have said, put in the name of your club. Thanks very much.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. This is being recorded, so we'll send it out again after as soon as possible tonight or tomorrow morning following the webinar. You can tell that the cricket's about to come back with the British weather we've got at the moment and the typical rain and everything, but it's really exciting times after all your patience and work around just helping us to support the game to get to this point. We're going to go through the webinar following sort of 4 key themes, really. One's around basic principles for your club, how to get the before activity and getting people into your ground, looking at during activity, and then basically what happens after the activity and going through. Phil will be here and do some safeguarding at the end, and also we've got some roundup, just some questions and those points going through. As I said, the likelihood is there'll be a lot of individual questions that relate to your ground, so please in the chat box just name your club as well, and if we don't get any general questions we can then come back to you with individual responses either from ourselves in Essex or from our colleagues across the East region as well. But thank you again for everything you've done over the last few weeks during this pandemic to keep cricket going and be prepared, ready for this exciting time for us actually to be able to get back out and start playing cricket, which is what we all want and all hope to do from the start. So, let's move on to the screen. Key thing is, obviously, as you saw, after a bit of back and forth with the government and DCMS, ECB on Friday got the go-ahead that cricket can move to step 4. This is available for us to play outdoor matches and is allowing us to play 11-a-side with no limitation on overs or anything. There are some adapted formats to it, but basically this is cricket getting back. It won't be quite how you knew it, say, in 2019 or 2018, but it is an opportunity for us to get back on the field and play a game of cricket, which we all want to do. The key bit about that is that obviously we've gone through 2 or 3 stages with the ECB around how we protect the game and then how we prepare ourselves to get through. And now we're at the stage around actually looking at how we get back open and start playing, as we've all supported and asked those questions over the last few weeks in terms of why can't we get cricket back open. Professor Nick Pearce from the ECB did the review and worked with DCMS around saying that cricket can be socially distanced, and with the right mitigations in place, we can have a safe game of cricket taking part and playing at that time. There are some key things around this though, and the basic principles we need to look at, and we have a responsibility as a game to take on. We've been very fortunate. We were on calls with other sports this week, and rugby don't think they're going to be back until towards the end of November, and football is still in discussions at the moment around potentially mid to late September, if not later around there. So part of the agreement with DCMS and the government is around the cricket family being responsible and having shown its responsibility in terms of sticking to the guidelines over the last 6 or 7 weeks as we've moved from stage 2 to stage 3 and now up to stage 4 as we go through. So within that, there's 4 key areas. There will be some minor adjustments to the play, as you might have seen. Your equipment will have to be sanitised and having a cleaning regime around that. It is vital that we do follow the NHS test and trace process coming through, and we also stick to social distancing. So if you can keep reminding yourselves as you go through your preparations for playing that these are 4 key areas that we need to go through, and you'll see underneath that to help risk reduction within those principles is your key ones that you've been picked up within society as we go through around the social distancing, washing our hands, avoid touching your face, cleaning our equipment with disinfectant wipes. You might have noticed, and it will come up a bit later, there's been a slight change to the guidelines in terms of what wipes to use and coming through. Making sure that all our kit is our kit. Bring our own water bottles and refreshments, your own other protections in terms of your own duty of care as you normally have within your players and your groups around sun cream, lip balm, towels, and making sure that you have a cleaning process within your facility as we go through. So thinking about your own grounds, I've got some examples as we've worked here within the Essex grounds in terms of how we set up ready for the players who came back 2 weeks ago. A key bit is how you make sure that within your members and your players, you're constantly checking for symptoms, whether that's some kind of questionnaire or just keep reminding the players and your members around actually what are the symptoms we're looking for. So a temperature, a loss of smell, loss of taste, and those kind of things. So looking for those key things around that we might bring as symptoms. And obviously a persistent cough is the other one we're looking through around those points. Making sure that all government guidelines are followed, and that's not just for COVID, that's just your normal duty of care as a club, that everything is in place that you would normally run as a club, or as a facility, or as a team, or a council facility, wherever you may be hosting, that all of those government guidelines is followed as normal as we come through. Making sure you're prepared for your hygiene. So as much as you're packing your kit with your normal cricket pads and your kit and your spikes and your bats, that actually we've gone prepared for a whole day, if that may be, around our hygiene protection. And as you can see there, the wipes have actually just changed on the guidelines now to an antimicrobial wipe rather than antiseptic one. So sanitizers as well as we go through. It is vital that you as a club do a risk assessment and compliant to all duty of care, as we mentioned before. And you will need to share that risk assessment potentially. Certainly if you are looking, and we've had requirements already for some of the county players to play or academy players to play, if you're expecting those guys to play, the county will need to see those risk assessments coming through to make sure that everything is in place for the safety of those players coming to play. But also you need to be prepared to share that with your members, but also with your opposition as well, that you've just put everything in place. I'm also being aware of local parish councils and councils now asking for clubs and teams who are playing on sites to show that they've done a risk assessment to make sure their mitigation's in place before bookings of council pitches can take place as well. So it's something to be prepared of. It doesn't need to be with a risk assessment. Try and keep it as simple as possible. Don't make it too complicated, but it just shows that you've thought about all potential mitigation you might need to follow up on around those points. As I say, you need to think about then your sign in entrance, and as you can see on the 2 maps, one of these is our Billericay cricket ground, and one is the county ground. The yellow triangles is where we have all our hand sanitizers dotted. The arrows show that there's a one-way system around the ground, and actually shows the dedicated zones in terms of where practices will take place and processes will happen. So thinking about actually where you need to put those signages and how you need to explain that to teams coming to you, including your members, will be really key around this point as we go through. You will also see a QR code on this screen as well. We've used that here as a way of tracking and tracing our players that are coming in as well as our visitors. So currently we've got some building work going on site. The QR code's been very easy, set up through Teams, and with a simple questionnaire, it just helps us to track and trace the people that are coming on and through the ground. One thing with all of this is just to make sure you're GDPR compliant as usual. So it might be with away teams, you need to ask them to sign or agree with one person that they have evidence or record of all of the people that are coming with their away team to show you. The same with officials, so you're not then having a stack of data behind you, but thinking about that GDPR, but you can easily go, if something happens following a game and symptoms are seen, you can actually trace and track who was at that ground, which groups were they in, and whereabouts were they playing, and who might have come into contact with them. So there's opportunities around that, and I'm sure between yourselves you'd have other ways of going through. Things also before the activity, like team sheets as well and team cards. So naturally, without thinking, you do a team card, that's sharing a card and a pen between people. So actually, could you do that electronically? And I know there's ways through Play Cricket, I believe now, but it also might be a simple, the home team fills it in, takes a photo, and it's sent by WhatsApp or another way. So there's opportunities around that, but trying again within your mitigation plan, which is the easiest way that's going to provide the least amount of touching points for anyone else to get involved within that scenarios you set up for your game. Travel guidelines, these need to be followed by the government. They are on the government side. This is a copy and paste from the government side around the big one that's been raised a lot. Obviously, key things around public transport. I know Los Fares people use public transport, so we need to make lists around this point. And then also, we need to make sure that within sharing, people are actually, as you can see on the list here, they're sharing with the transport with the same people each time. They're keeping into small groups. And again, you've risk mitigated around these points as it goes through. And you're making sure you've got an assessment around those points. And obviously the face wearing is a key point of that as well. So I'd recommend around this bit, if you've got any concern, to make sure you go and look at the government guidelines and have a clarity around how your club wants to process its position around if you are going to have car sharing going on. Some clubs might decide that actually that's too much of a risk and will require everyone to travel on their own. So it's worth being really clear about that and what's best for your club and for your individuals and your members as you go through. Same with changing rooms. The current guidelines are with the changing rooms that they are out of bounds. You'll see in the ECB guidelines that it says to follow government guidelines around this. That is because they're in constant conversation with them at the moment around looking at the opportunity of how these might open up with potentially of gyms and leisure centres potentially coming open in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So that guidelines will change. As soon as we get information around that, we can update you. But currently they are closed. It is recommended that you keep one of them really and keep them clean so they're ready to open if we need them in the future. But also you might need one as an isolation room if someone at the ground was to show symptoms that might need looking after while they're at the ground and stuff like those ways. But currently on the back of this, you need to then think about where are people going to be based around your ground, creating social distancing so they can actually still get ready and prepared for their game from that. So where is the home team going to be based, the away team, the officials, and spectators as well. So they're all socially distanced around your facility and your ground as it goes forward from that point. Also on the back of that is what happens when it rains. As you can see today and this week, it is likely to happen. The guidelines suggest that people go back to their cars. That might not always be possible in certain areas. So thinking about what your mitigation plans are around that situation if it was to be wet weather, and actually how can we cope with that situation if it was to come about during a game. Moving on to the compete stage. So now we've got everything set up. The great game's ready to go. We're ready to compete and have a match, which will be great news on Saturday, and we look forward to seeing the pictures and stories coming back from people playing games. You can only play outdoors. As you've said, the good work that has been put in and working with the Professor Nutt Pierce from ECB, who's the Chief Medical Officer, and the government PCMS, that any format is able to be played. And there's no limitation on overs, and it can be 11-a-side. you need to think about how the players set up and prepared to get ready to play. Obviously, ideally limiting sharing of equipment, and if it is shared, it needs to be regularly cleaned as much as possible. There is no sweat and saliva on the ball. I know those that have been watching the test match would have seen that they're allowed to use sweat at international level, but due to the testing in the biosecure environment that's allowed at that level. At this level, at recreational level, there is no sweat or saliva to be on the ball at any point. So you need to think about mitigation, because obviously it's something that's been inherent in terms of people using. So if it does happen in a game, how do you a quick wipe of the ball, hand sanitizing takes place, and you have one of your natural hygiene breaks that happens in that situation. You will also see that as soon as the ball is fielded or the wicket keeper gets it, it goes straight back to the bowler. So none of this passing it around. So games might actually go a little bit quicker, but also just making sure it goes straight back to the bowler from that point. In the umpire's guidance that we've got coming up, you'll see also that the umpires do not touch the ball. It's left on the ground at hygiene breaks and drinks breaks. And also each umpire is dedicated to their own set of stumps that only they will touch. And then obviously again, they are cleaned during the hygiene breaks as we go through on that side. So only the umpire who looks after a set will pick up those bails as we go through. The guidelines recommend that every 6 overs or 20 minutes, whichever is first, there is a hygiene break, including the ball and the stumps, and everyone's hands are cleaned at that point. So you need to think about sanitisation, hand sanitisers around the ground and coming through. The same with going back to the umpires bit, that the umpires aren't allowed to take the cap or the jumper or any equipment from a bowler anymore. So you'll need to have locations or areas where so you can actually put those back caps or hats around the outside of the boundary when that happens. And again, it can't be that the player passes it to another player to go and put it on the boundary. So there's no movement of equipment around those points. The big bit that's been picked up probably, and you would have seen, is this bit around the batters going through. So there needs to be 2 marks put either side of the playing wicket. It's 2 meters apart, which the batters run alongside. So they're keeping well away from either side. The bowlers follow through. Slipstreams for the umpires that might be standing in that, but they've got their own dedicated area. The requirements require just 2 lines. Now this could be 2 bowling markers that are put down. It could be 2 lines. It doesn't need to be a whole straight line down the middle, but you do need to think about whereabouts that's located so it doesn't end up running down the middle of another pitch. And the same as in any game, we just need to monitor where those batters are running and just making sure that we're requiring that situation. The ones to stay 2 meters from social distancing, but also they're sticking between those markers as they're running up and down. So it will take a little bit of time, but actually if you watch some games, batters do tend to start running quite wide now, and I think it's just how you best locate that on your ground. As I say, it could be 4 bowling markers that are put down. I've heard already some junior games thinking about putting some cones down, or it could be just simply some markers on the floor that will help you to get around that point. The other big piece is obviously you've seen is that there's no food. So players will need to bring their own refreshments to a game. I think they're going through that point. The food can't be served by the club. It has to be, like I say, brought by each individual player and looked after. A small price to pay for us being able to be out and playing cricket as much as possible. How you set up for your scorers. So only 1 scorer in a box if you have a box set up. So actually, how do you get that set up around your ground and making sure that they're socially distanced within that setup. And finally, to make sure as the batter leaves the field, either they've been out or I think they need to wipe down their bats and clean their bats and their gloves as they leave the field and coming through with the wipes that we've mentioned earlier. As mentioned, the umpires have also been sent their own guidelines to link into this. Again, it's very similar to what's in the others. So umpires staying 2 meters apart, keeping social distancing. Umpires don't touch the ball. Where's the plan for umpires to go if it starts raining? Making sure that they are in control of those hygiene breaks and sanitizer opportunity. As we mentioned, they have 1 set of stumps that they look after, and they're not able to touch other players' equipment and clothing around that. So they're basically there just to oversee the game and support it. All the other little nice extras that they used to do for us as umpires is out of the question, and actually just from a hygiene point of view just enables us to carry on playing. And as I said from the start, be trustworthy with the DCMS that we can actually play this game in a very social way, that's very supportive of the track and trace policies for the NHS going through. Alongside this, we can obviously increase our training now to 30 in a group, but because training has been recognised as a higher risk because the groups can actually be closer together, it is recommended still within the guidelines that everyone works to smaller groups within that. There's no actual recommendation on numbers, but it suggests that you still try to work to groups of 6. Within that group, it can be one coach, but then your ratios as within safe hands need to be followed as set out in the guidelines and within your safe hands guidelines and in the guidelines that have been sent out by the ECB. They are looking to relaunch All Stars over the next week or so, so you'll see information coming out of that, and that will have plenty of activities and ideas around how you might be able to manage group sessions and coaches going through. Currently, with the DCMS, it's one of the things they're still working on, but as part of the agreement to get the activation of playing matches, the spare net still needs to be in place for the training sessions as well at the moment. So we hope to get some more information out in the next few weeks, but currently it was one of the things that was a sort of negotiable situation around the opportunity for us to come back to playing matches, that needs to stay in place. Again, with juniors, you're going to have a lot more parents and everything, so making sure you've got a safeguarding process and a GDPR process around the track and trace of juniors that are coming onto your site, the same as if you're playing the match. All the kit needs to be cleaned again, as you've been doing with the normal guidelines, so some plastic kits may be better in terms of being able to wipe down. And again, just making sure you've got a clear mitigation in place in terms of how you're going to manage those groups and control those groups. If you have a big enough ground, there's nothing to stop you having 2 groups of 30, or even if it's big enough, 3 groups of 30, but obviously the social distancing needs to take place within that. And then you need to think about the challenges you might have around if you've got 90 people there, that's potentially 90 parents on top of that. You end up having 180, 200 people. That could be a challenge around that process that we're going through. So how you would manage that from a car parking process to actually whereabouts those social distancing places will be able to take place within that. It is worth noting that apart from cricket, there's only weddings that can only have groups of 30 at the moment. So despite what some pictures and videos might show you on the news from weekends and stuff like that, there's only the 2 things, which is a game of cricket or a cricket club and a wedding that's allowed to have groups of 30 up. So again, it's our responsibility to show that we can stick to these guidelines that are allowing us to be back playing and working together. Once we've finished, then there's a key process in terms of how you manage people at the end of the game. Obviously quite easily, you'll want to come up and the sportsmanship and the spirit of cricket that we all have, but actually we need to make sure that's social distancing, so making sure that we have clear process in terms of how people will leave the ground or the playing area, making sure that everyone washes their hands and the hand sanitizer takes place, all equipment is wiped down, and ideally as much as possible people don't hang around as much as anything. If you do, or you're having some kind of social activity, that needs to follow the government guidelines for hospitality that were sent out last week by the ECB, but also on the government site. And you need to be very careful that it doesn't go into, especially reading the points around that about it being an event or gatherings which aren't allowed at the moment. So you need to make sure you've got a clear capacity and a risk mitigation around that process. We obviously want to make sure one of the things coming back to play is obviously the social side of being able to interact with long lost friends or teams we've played with a long time, but we need to be very careful around how that looks and how that is supported afterwards. It's also recommended that there is a volunteer or a person responsible from the club who will collect and disinfect all of the other shared equipment that might have been gone. So whether that's the stumps, boundary markers, building discs, whatever it may be, that one person collects that, so it keeps the minimal touch points between people and members within your club. The other thing is, once the club's been used and the match facility's been used, is actually how do we get regular cleaning of that facility to take place and coming through. And using the track and trace, it's very key that we make sure that we have a process that if following the matches or a training session, there's a report of symptoms from any person that's been at that facility, that we have a process for that reporting to take place and come back through, that we can then track and trace and take place the government guidelines around what's required in that situation. So just passing on to Phil now, who's going to go through some more safeguarding points around this.
Thanks, Dan, and thank you to all those people who have logged in today. Immediately, we have got 100 online already, so the interest is there, and hopefully we can get some cricket activity for young people. A lot of them been in lockdown for too long now and are desperate to get back, and we don't want to lose those people from the cricket family. So clubs extending their period to be appreciated. With that comes responsibility, and it's clear that within any club, we need the club officials. That will be the senior people in the club welfare officer, the youth manager, the youth coaches, and everybody else to really go through the guidelines. I've had a number of questions already in the chat box about the templates. The templates have been widely circulated. They do take a long time to go through. There's a lot of links within links. So you need to sit down probably at the club and really plan out how you're going to do that. Make sure it's carefully zoned, so it's very clear when people come into the club that where to go to. Make sure that you've got one-way systems where appropriate. The zones are color-coded and parents are communicated beforehand. We need to make sure that where possible, and particularly if you've got an all-stars group coming in, that start and finish time can be staggered with maybe some of the older groups coming in. We need to make sure, particularly, and this is a really vital thing, that it's not only the children who are registered when they come in, but everybody needs to register when they come in. If there is any need to go into track and trace, whatever, we need to ensure that all cricket clubs have behaved responsibly to make sure we've got the appropriate information. That will inevitably mean some additional volunteers to be on site. I've particularly put down the idea that we need to get the whole idea that the toilets and washroom facilities will be available. However, the pavilion will not be available for meeting up. But we do need to make sure that there's sufficient volunteers who know what they're doing. And it's that general discussion around the fact that what we've got to do, that all the users, from the children to the parents, the coaches, to the officials, all understand very carefully that COVID-19 has got to be addressed as a serious situation. We need to make sure that cricket is a responsible organisation to make sure we can deal with it appropriately and with confidence. Thanks for that. Can we have the next slide, please? Particularly for parents, and the good thing about all of these slides, it's a very good checklist for people. As I said earlier, there's a lot of information about there, but if you go through these slides, that will be a checklist for all clubs to ensure. It's going to be important that parents are communicated about times that you're going to be putting on activities, the age groups, the regulations which we've just gone through. The basic things that kids must come in changed kit. There'll be nowhere to change for them. That they have used the toilet and washed their hands before they leave home. Personal sanitizers come up as a question. Dan just used a slide on that. Be very, very clear about what is appropriate. It is the parents' responsibility to ensure they have sanitizer for their own child, a drinks bottle, any food. There won't be any food available, only drinks available. So please make sure you have that. Ensure your parents understand that. In terms of walking, traveling or whatever, there's a lot of good guidance out there. This is government guidance rather than necessarily ECB. Please make sure that's complied with, and the traditional view when a parent may pick up multiple children is not acceptable. The other thing that parents traditionally do is come and watch the game, so that's fine, but I think good practice will be they will bring their own chair, a spring-mounted chair or whatever, so they can socially distance and watch the activity. And again, hopefully it won't be necessary. Parents will understand, but club officials may need to take a bit of control to make sure that parents do socially distance themselves. They need to understand that they cannot take part even the sort of things they normally do, fielding the balls, throwing it back, whatever. And also, and most importantly, and it's been mentioned before, but it's very significant, particularly if we have weather, as we've had over the last few weeks. If it suddenly rains, it won't be the traditional rush back inside the pavilion. So people with cars, it's pretty straightforward. It'll be back to your cars. However, if you've come from public transport, if you walked in, that will not be we need to stress to parents that will not be available. So a lot of discussion between club officials and making sure that all the coaches understand what's happening, but also parents are very well briefed. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Phil. So just to conclude, and we'll get some questions. I'll also speak to guys from the region. That it's all our responsibility to make the most of this opportunity really that's come about. And we've been very fortunate in terms of what the work that's gone on. I know it's been frustrating at times, but thank you again for your patience and all your work around it. We have got this opportunity. And I say with minimal competition, with lack of rugby and football until later in the year, we've got a real chance, as golf has seen and tennis has seen, to maybe get a few people back playing cricket and picking up a bat and ball for the first time. So I think it's a real good opportunity for us to really focus on around what's going to help us to encourage more people to play cricket, rather than worrying about the competition side maybe as much as anything. So really helping within your club, your local area, community, local challenges, festivals, and fixtures around those points. Making sure you've got a risk assessment and mitigation for your ground and your process, and you're communicating that plan not only to your own members, but people that come in to play you or to visit your ground is really important around that point. And keep thinking and being flexible and creative around how we get the game on. That's the key bit. Like I say, we've got this opportunity now to play. And be honest, it might take you a week or 2 weeks to get ready to play around that, putting this in place and thinking about how it will best work for you. But really have a stepstone approach around how we actually get encouraging to get the game on is a real key point for it. Make sure we keep working as the whole cricket family to help each other. So again, if your facility is not available, it hasn't got a game on it, and a club down the road or a team down the road is looking for a ground, can we open up our facility using our guidelines and mitigation to encourage another game to go on that might support us? So we're working together collectively around that. Certainly thinking of clubs and teams who might have challenges around school sites they've used in the past that might not be open. They might be able to access your grounds and take place around that as long as they follow your guidance and your mitigation. What you will also have is, you'll see over next week's Cricket Force will be relaunched. And those clubs that are already registered for Cricket Force will be sent a pack to support COVID and Step 4. We believe this to be sort of some PPE equipment, sort of hat and wipes, hand sanitizers. But as we get more information, we'll send this out to you across the club and league network. But also I believe it's going to be open for clubs who didn't register in the first time to register as well. So there's a great opportunity there, again, for the cricket family to come together and show right across our communities that we're a very responsible sport, and we're doing everything we can not only to encourage people to get more physical and back out playing, but being aware of what the challenges have been around this period of time with this pandemic. And the other key thing for you is if you get any questions or anything, make sure you speak to your counties. And they'll be able to help and offer more support and advice. And if they haven't got the answers, then they'll obviously feed that up to the ECB to come back to you with any more questions around that point. I don't know if Lewis or Ben, who I know is on the call, want to add anything else from their region point.
Hi everyone, just really quickly from a Norfolk point of view. Obviously I'm conscious there's a number of our clubs on there from Norfolk. First of all, thanks to Dan and Phil for obviously running us through the presentation. Again, as Dan has alluded to, if anyone, particularly from Norfolk, if you've got any questions about your clubs or procedures, don't hesitate to get in touch. Conscious, obviously, there's been a lot of good questions in the chat box, and as Dan has said, we're currently feeding stuff back that some of us are unsure on to ECB, and we do anticipate an FAQs document to come out at some time in the next few days. But again, when we run through the chat in a moment, I'm sure Dan will be able to touch upon some of the questions that have been asked.
And Ben?
Hi, thanks, Dan. Yeah, just echoing Lewis's points there as well. Thanks again to Dan and Phil for putting this on. From a CAM's point of view, we will be sending the recording of this out to the clubs, so you'll have an opportunity to see it again, and obviously any guys that have missed it. And we have been having a few questions coming in and have replied to the ones we can, and we'll feed the other ones back up to get answers if we don't have them. But obviously continue to keep talking to us over the next few days if you do have any questions. Thanks, Dan.
It shows how fast moving it is, because there's just been an announcement from the 25th that leisure centres and stuff like that can open. So again, there might be some guidelines around the changing rooms around that point, but at the current time, as we recommend, they're shut, and we must follow the guidelines and show the responsibility we have in terms of helping team sports and specifically Iron to come back to things. But as you can see, it is a fast moving, as you've seen over the last 10 days, how quick things can change. And again, we just appreciate all your hard work and efforts to help us get into this situation where cricket can come back for every level, whether that's ability, women, girls, juniors, up to seniors. up to vets cricket as well. So go through. So Phil, is there any specific questions?
Yeah, I'll concentrate on the questions for, in fact, getting the game on, which some very basic, straightforward ones. Firstly, from John, can we use both of our nets for training?
No. If you've got 2 net lane system, you can currently still only use one of those nets. We're constantly going back with DCMS through the ECB to see if that can move. And again, as I just said, the guidelines are moving quite quickly. We checked that this afternoon, and still currently you have to have a spare net in between the sessions. It goes like with the training sessions earlier, you can now have 30 as a whole group, but they need to ideally be in small working groups because the risk is still perceived to be higher in a training environment than it is in a game environment.
Okay, a question, a good comment from Andrew Shields, and also a question from Paul Frame about logging people in for adult matches, adult cricket, and that's really around logging people. Can we use play cricket details as our log-on details, for our log, player log?
Yes, I know a couple of the Premier Leagues, and we've got a meeting with all leagues on Monday. They're looking to use play cricket as their team sheets and cards and activations for that way. We'll go back to the ECB and through play cricket to see if we can get some guidelines out around that to help you as clubs.
Good. A good point and question for bowlers, hat and jumpers. Instead of leaving them behind the boundary, can they just be left on a line of the stumps and both teams agree to waive the 5-run penalty?
Again, if you have that conversation with the 2 captains at the start and you have those adaptations, I suppose it's a little bit like the old tree branches overlying the ground. Is it 4 or 6 or local rules? If you can have that and both teams agree, then that's fine. All that can't happen is the umpires and that can't touch them.
Good. A question about wicket keepers and do they need face covering if they're standing up to the wicket? And can a batsman request this?
I think there's a big question around the peer pressure around that point, which is really positive. But under the guidelines, and it's been researched by DCMS and the SAG group and Professor Nick Pearce's ECB, that they don't require the wicketkeeper to have any kind of face mask standing up because the limited time that the person might be within break social distancing, say a metre, is so small that the risk is very minimal. So, but I think there is a point to be aware of from a safeguarding point. If a wicketkeeper doesn't feel comfortable to stand up and the rest of their teammates are telling him to stand up, then I think we need to respect that fact that individual doesn't want to do that at that point. So I think there is definitely a conversations to be had going through, but under the guidelines, the keeper can stand up in their normal pool equipment that required the safeguarding requirements for that.
And a question, 3 or 4 comments from Robert, Andrew and Paul around sanitizer. Is there a specific sanitizer that is specified and who's responsible for ensuring that suitable sanitizers are brought to the game and used by the people? Would it be the players, the club, the home team, whatever?
The sanitizer one needs to be one with a high enough alcohol content that it kills bacteria at those levels, the same as you would use in your hands at home or anywhere else around that point. And I would say that has to go in your risk assessment and your mitigation, and you just need to make sure you communicate that to, number one, your members and any spectators that come on, but to your opposition. And again, just it might be some spot checks, it might be however you see it around those points, but let's work together around this point. We've got this opportunity to play. Let's try and be creative and make sure we're supporting each team and players that are coming around this, rather than trying to find ways that we might not be able to let people play. So I think making sure we communicate what's in our risk assessment and mitigation for our ground is really key around this.
Thank you. A very good question from Paul, which refers to life outside of the glorious first and second 11s and in third, fourths and friendly cricket, when umpiring is frequently exchanged between the batting side, scoring can pass from person to person. What would be good practice around ensuring sanitisation of wickets, putting the bowers back in this situation?
I think what we suggest is you use your hygiene breaks at that point. So if it's the old 10 overs and someone changes over, or it's 6 over, you might only umpire for 6 overs now, so it's limiting the time. That becomes a natural break in the game. Change of umpire, stumps and bails are all wiped down and clean. If it's a change of scorebook, then again, ideally, look at other opportunities. It might be you move now on to play cricket online and it's an iPad. You wipe down the iPad with a sanitizer or a phone. and score online that way. Again, it might be that you require whoever's scoring for that 6 overs to wear gloves if you think that's through that point, and just making sure that there's a clean hygiene process. The key thing to think about is how do you limit touching points between one person and another person, and the opportunity around that. So if you're neutralising that, then you're doing as much as you can to mitigate against any potential risk.
I think it's going to be very important that clubs do make contact before a game so that they can exchange information in terms of signage, how to get into grounds, what's going to be available, what's significant, what's not going to be available, particularly in areas, as you mentioned, Dan, in terms of equipment, making sure that regular breaks are agreed beforehand. A fielding question and coaching question, is there any... in terms of, does training mean we can now do catching and fielding practice if we sanitise our hands and balls?
Yes. So if I give you the example with the risk assessment we have here for the pros, is they'll have a dedicated, within their group, they've got a dedicated set of balls that work with that fielding group. At the end of each session, each of those balls is wiped down. So again, following the same guidelines as in a gameplay, around a 10, 15 minute or 20 minute break. Session. At the end of that session, all the balls are wiped down, all the players sanitize their hands, and then they can move on that way from that point. So again, think about how you minimize the risk associated around that point. Keep aligning the players to not touch their face or anything while they're doing those fielding practices. So you'd have seen the England players have got headbands, so it stops them wiping the sweat away from their face. But certainly just use the same. Don't run a half an hour fielding session with no stopping in it. If you've got a fielding session going on, after a certain amount of time, no more than 20 minutes, the session stops, there's a game in the game, and there's a natural hygiene break takes place. That hand sanitizer happens, wiping of the ball, or any stumps or stuff that have been used as well.
For Mark O'Neill, in terms of putting out match equipment, does it have to be the same person putting it away that puts it out?
Ideally, but again, that's not always possible. So again, just making sure that they've fully hand sanitized everything they've done around it. Again, you write that in your individual risk assessment and mitigation around how that's going to take place. It's not always possible because people can be there at the start of the game but can't be there at the end. But ideally, it's one person at the end who will collect everything up. So you don't get the old, like we used to have, 5 or 6 people go and collect the fielding discs or the stumps, and everyone has that role. It's one person that goes and collects it all. They make sure it's all sanitized down and it's ready for the next use around that. The other one to be aware of around that point is bringing covers on and making sure you use social distancing when covers are on and those processes around. And if you're fortunate to have those situations, how that process goes about as well.
Question for Anthony at Redbourne, and again, it's a live question. Can we open our changing rooms for players to use the loo?
If it's the toilet, yes. They just can't use them as a changing room access. And again, it might be that's your isolation. If it's not your isolation room as well, because you want to keep that separate. But if you do your toilets, what you need to think about is the more things you open up, the more cleaning you've got to do.
Good. Graham Smith commented on the idea that it's agreeable by umpires that a 5-run penalty will not take any effect. Thanks, Graham. A couple of questions about the presentation. Yes, we will make it available both as a recording, but also the slides. Last few questions. Now that's come up again about 2 in a net. No, the answer is, as Dan just said. Advice on the use of sight screens, an interesting one. I haven't seen that, about traditional sight screens being moved by players.
Yep. Again, just limiting the touching points. So you might just make sure that there's gloves near the sight screen, or there's anti-wipes, or at least there's hand sanitizer. So as soon as the sight screen's been moved, those players wipe their hands down and wash their hands down. So as long as you're you've risk assessed it, you've put your mitigation in place to limit that point, and you go through. And again, it might be that you allocate the same 2 or 3 players to move the sight screen all the time. So again, it's unfortunate for them, but I think that's the small price we have to pay as a game to make sure that we make the best of this opportunity. So just little things like that, and it's great they're being picked up. It's just to take a little bit of time to think about how you put that in place going forward.
I think the other thing, particularly in some games where if the batting side can take responsibility for moving the sight screens rather than expecting the fielding side to move around. Question about valuables and storing bags and things. Are they allowed to use the changing room?
They can use the change room for that again, but you need to do your own individual club's risk assessment and mitigation around that point. So again, that's no different to what you do with valuables going forward in the past. Your recommendation would be the car, but then obviously if the car is parked away from the ground, is not visible, then that could be a higher risk. So you need to sit down with your new individual club committees or your teams and the venue you use. What is the safest thing to do for your venue? And again, it's very hard because each one is so different. But if you think that's going to be the safest, it's a bag put together, locked away in a changing room, then that's fine. But again, you need to think about the cleaning process for that changing room afterwards.
Good. And we're coming to the last one. If anybody's got any last questions, please get them in quickly because we're just coming to the end. The question about PPE, and do clubs have to have masks available in the event of a medical emergency, or maybe the question is also at any time?
Yeah, your first aid kit should probably have them in anyway, and going from that point. So again, it's checking what's in your first aid kit. Have you got everything that's required for your normal duty of care as a club or as a venue that you would run anyway? So just making sure they're in place is really key. And again, just make sure it's noted in your risk assessment and your mitigation around what the process is for that for an injury.
Okay, final question coming in from Simon. Can we share, this is an interesting one. Can we car share in lower leagues with youngsters if it rains, or do we leave them out in the rain?
That's specifically what we say. You've got to look at your risk assessment, and I keep repeating myself here. And as Phil says, you need to look at your safeguarding policy and everything. And I would say the best minimising that risk is ideally the parents who are at that game watching the game as well, so they've got their own car to go into. If not, and that's not the situation, you need to then probably review your risk assessment before that to understand what the process is around that point. As with the hospitality, if you are fortunate enough to be at a ground, not every ground has a pavilion, and those points, some of the pavilions might be open for social drinks, meeting alongside the hospitality guidelines. It might be that there's areas within that pavilion that the younger players can go and sit or wait inside, as long as the capacity issues of that pavilion don't go above the social distancing measures. So all of this has to be looked at with your individual location within your own committees and your own management teams around what's going to be your process for reacting for that situation.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And following on from Simon's question about, are cars going to be available if it rains? Hopefully a lot of clubs now are arranging fixtures at grounds very near to them rather than traditionally travelling across the county and counties to play games. And we make sure that we do understand that kids should not be collected in great bulk and taken. I know that goes against some of the great traditions that we've already established with under 18s playing in adult cricket, but we need to be socially aware and not put them at risk, or just yourselves or your relatives at risk. So a lot of consideration needs to be for team selection, travelling arrangements in good time. The last, Peter, we only have one way into the toilet and the same exit. How best to control that? Practical question. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, you just basically got to manage it, have a think about the process in terms of a one-way, not a one-way system, but an in-out, so a one-in, one-out system. So it might be they have to shut the front door before they get to the toilet situation, so people know that the toilet's been used, or some kind of sign on the front of the door that says it's in-out. You need to look at your own venue around that point in terms of how you make people aware that there's someone already in the toilet before they come out and the next person goes in. And again, it's hard without looking at the specifics of each individual ground around what that works like.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much from the chat box questions. That's a really thorough lot. We will, as been said, publish this very shortly in terms of the full-length webinar, but also the slides. But the point really comes across strongly is making sure we ask questions beforehand and we get cricket started in the right way, and we don't have any incidents or any problems which will bring the game in disrepute, or most importantly, put parents off and bringing the kids along to games.
So thank you very much, everyone. I know it's gone over our normal sort of half an hour slot, but it's obviously a very key conversation that's going on. If anything is specific to your own club that comes up or you don't think it's been answered, then please get in touch with a member of your representative county who will look at the specifics for your own ground and everything going forward. And please make the most of hopefully a dry weekend and getting back on the field and playing what we all love to do, which is playing cricket rather than sitting in front of Zoom meetings and webinars and stuff. So please make the most of it. Stay safe. And again, please just get in touch if there's anything else that we can help you with as we go forward. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks very much, everybody.